Thank you.
Hey. Good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Buenas tardes. Good
Buenas
afternoon.
tardes.
First of all, let me say a huge gracias, thank you to MoveOn, and to Karine, and to Stephanie, and to DJ Carmen Spindiego. I'm lucky that I didn't come out like 2 seconds before. I was going to have to dance. Thank you all very much for being here as well. So I'm Julián Castro. You know, I often feel like I need a name tag because I have a twin brother that some of y'all may have seen, Joaquin. Joaquin is here somewhere. He's the one in Congress. I'm the one running for president, and he likes to say that the way to tell us apart is that I'm 1 minute uglier than he is. But don't believe him. You know, a few weeks ago, about 8 weeks ago, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, about 2 blocks away from the Mother Emanuel AME Church. And you already remember that about 4 years ago, Dylan Roof walked into Mother Emanuel AME Church and he murdered 9 people while they were worshiping. And then a couple of hours later, he was apprehended by police without incident. And it made me think, you know, as he should be apprehended without incident, but it made me think then, what about Eric Garner? And what about Philando Castile? And what about Pamela Turner? And what about Jason Perro? And what about Tamir Rice? And what about Laquan McDonald? And what about so many others? What about Stephon Clark? And what about Antonio Arce? What about all of those young men and women whose lives were lost because of police violence? We're going to say their names. The thing is that how many of these videos do we have to watch to understand that even though we have some great police officers, this is not a case of bad apples. The system is broken. The system is broken. The system is broken. So let's fix it. On Monday, we're going to unveil a plan to reform policing in the United States, to ensure that no matter who you are, what the color of your skin is, what neighborhood you live in, how much money you have or don't have, what you're doing in your life, walking down the block, hanging out at your house, having a barbecue in the park, going about your business, that you're treated the same under the law. And you know, Stephon Clark's story is a good example of that. Police were in search of a young man that they believe had committed a crime, and they started running after Stephon, and they went into the backyard of a home and went around a blind corner, and within a couple of seconds, they had fired 20 shots and killed Stephon. It would seem like he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, except he was in his grandmother's house, in her backyard. So how do we fix this broken system? Number one, we're going to work to end over-aggressive policing. Secondly, we're going to hold police departments and police officers accountable in this country for excessive force. And third, we're going to work to heal the divide that too often exists between communities and police. We're going to do things like demilitarize our police, stop selling them weapons of war. We're going to work with Congress to stop and frisk and racial profiling in this country. We're going to hold them accountable by passing a national use of force standard that says you can only use force if life is imminently threatened and there are no other reasonable alternatives to that force. And we're also going to track the use of excessive force by police officers, because too often times that's not reported to the FBI. It's voluntary right now. We need to make it mandatory. And we need to create a public database so that the public and departments that hire across the United States understand the track record of officers who have used excessive force. Because too often times an officer will have an incident in one department and just move on over a few miles to the next police department, and that's unacceptable. We need a way to track that and to hold officers accountable. We're also going to work to heal the divide that too often exists between police and the community. You know, we got to support organizations that are doing great work to bridge that divide. Across the bay in Oakland, Pastor Mike and his team are doing some of that work. We need to build trust with community and police by ending 287G agreements that turn local law enforcement officers into federal law enforcement officers. And we need to ensure as we go forward that we work with police departments to improve recruitment and to invest in community policing. I'm convinced that we need a president that is going to be a president for everybody, and also one that is not afraid to tackle even the toughest issues and the most controversial ones. That's why I was the first candidate to release a comprehensive immigration plan. And that's why I released an education plan about 2 weeks ago that works to dismantle the birth to school to prison pipeline so that we end the experience that too many people in this country have of ending up incarcerated without ever having a first chance in the first place. We're going to give them that first chance. We're going to make those investments, and we're going to reform policing in the United States. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Have a seat. First of all, thank you for that truly big and bold idea and for trying to tackle this problem. Let's give him a round of applause for that.
Thank you.
You alluded to this, but police brutality is bigger than a federal policy issue. It's deeply, deeply rooted in hundreds of years of history in this country and society. So how do issues of race and other societal issues feed into this, and what are some of your other plans to address those? Well,
you're right. It's much bigger than just the relationship between a police officer and what he or she encounters on the street. It's much bigger than just police reform. It's about reforming our criminal justice system. I believe that we should do that, sentencing reform, investing in public defenders, cash bail reform, right? But it even goes beyond that. It's making sure that we do things like universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds so that everybody gets a strong start in their life with education, no matter who you are or what neighborhood you come from. It's making sure that everybody has health care in this country. It's making sure that we have a 21st century safety net, and that we do this with a critical eye toward the way that this affects communities of color. Because it's one thing to say everybody's going to have health care or everybody's going to have universal education, but you know that people are treated differently based on the color of their skin or where they come from in our healthcare system, our education system. So we need to address that too.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just really, I'm so happy you're bringing this conversation up. So we often read reports of officers accused of police violence in Black and brown communities, but rarely about charges, right, that brought against them, and even less about actual convictions. How can communities hold police officers accountable in the greater justice system that is not also accountable?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. You're right. I mean, how many times have we seen when you have body cam footage or you have very compelling video, the Rodney King incident, you know, more than 25 years ago now was a great example of this. But you have either prosecutors who won't prosecute or juries who take on a case and just won't find a defendant guilty. We need to change that. The good news is that that's begun to change. You've seen over the last couple of years that more prosecutors are making the case, more grand juries are indicting, and more juries have actually returned verdicts finding officers guilty. I believe we need to start, number one, by supporting only prosecutors that won't be afraid to make the case in local communities throughout the United States. And also, by ensuring that people know their rights, because oftentimes people are afraid to come to the police, and increasing transparency. Body cams are a good start, but also creating that database that I talked about so that we can track officers who have a history of using force excessively. By shining a light on a system where there's been way too much darkness in the past, I think that we can bring about a change and see to it that in situations like Laquan McDonald's or Walter Scott's or so many others that we get justice.
Thank you.
All right. So next we're going to shift to a MoveOn member question, and these can be on any topic. They're for MoveOn members across the country. Francesca from Massachusetts writes about what change will be made concerning African American women before, during, and after pregnancy to protect them and ensure their babies have a positive outcome. As you know, the American maternal mortality rate has doubled in the last couple of decades. The news is even worse for women of color, who are 3 to 4 times more likely to face that risk. And so to Francesca's question, what would you do to make sure that there would be a more positive outcome for those women?
Great. Thank you for the question, Francesca. So let's take this the way that it was asked. You know, we have a tremendous challenge in this country, really a tragedy, that the maternal mortality rate for African American women is sky high compared to white women and other women in this country. What do we do about that? Number one, that's why we need to have universal health care. It's also why we need to invest particularly not just in reproductive freedom, but reproductive justice to make sure in communities of color and in poor communities that women are able to get the health care services they need, that they have access to cost-free birth control if they want it, in addition to health care, that they have access to good prenatal care, right, for the baby and for themselves. But during their pregnancy, they have that access, and also afterward, that they have the health care they need to ensure that the baby is healthy and that they are healthy too. But we need to go beyond that. We need to also address the fact that too oftentimes they're treated differently by healthcare providers, right? And incentivize and require healthcare providers to develop guidelines and policies in their institutions so that whether the color of your skin is black or it's white or it's brown or whatever it is, that you're treated the same way, that you're given the same level of care, that you're respected as a human being in the same way. That's what we need to do.
Great. So I wanted to ask you about an issue that's been in the headlines, rightfully so, these last couple of weeks, which is abortion. Yeah. The attack on abortion, the attack on women's rights, the attack on women's right to choose. So Alabama recently passed a bill that would essentially make all abortions in the state illegal. Georgia, Ohio, and numerous other states have similar laws. How do we fight back and expand reproductive freedom in this country?
Number one, we need to vote out those politicians that put those laws into effect in the first place. And MoveOn has been, the folks here in this room have been a large part of galvanizing people in local communities and in states across this country to do that. In these congressional elections and state elections, we need to recruit great candidates that can run against some of these people, whether it's in Georgia or Alabama or other communities. But also, we can support legislation in Congress that will cut off the ability of these states to pass these draconian laws. And there is legislation right now, the Women's Health Protection Act, that would do that. I support that, so that states don't race to the bottom in terms of abridging a woman's fundamental right to choose. And what we see in Alabama, in Georgia, in Missouri, and a number of other states is an all-out assault on that right. If I'm president, I'll make sure only to appoint judges to the federal judiciary that respect a woman's right to choose and that will uphold Roe v. Wade. Because we know what the stakes are. We know what the stakes are. This next president may well get to appoint 1 or 2 Supreme Court justices. You're going to get to appoint a number of federal appellate justices and many, many federal district court judges. So it's important that we appoint judges that embrace progressive values and understand the right to choose.
Thank you.
Thank you. This will be our last question, and it's a question that I've been wanting to get in all afternoon, but we've been running out of time, which is you have a historic candidacy, right? You are the only Latinx candidate in the race today in 2020, so hats off for that. And 32 million Latinos will be eligible to vote in 2020. What does that mean in this moment in time where Latinos have been such a target of Donald Trump, and immigrants have been such a target, but Latinos in particular have been a target of Donald Trump?
You know, I think for all of us who are running, there's a responsibility, of course, to be a candidate for everybody and, if elected, to be a president for everybody. But I do think that there's a special meaning right now, a resonance, to run as a Latino in 2020 because the community feels, many Latinos feel under siege by this administration. From the moment that this president announced his campaign to the time that he said that that judge couldn't do his job because he was Mexican, to the way that he has treated Puerto Rico and the way that he has treated these migrants from Central American countries. There's an animus, there's a bigotry, there's a racism there that hasn't gone unnoticed. And that's one of the reasons that I've just determined in this campaign that we're going to be fearless. Yep. This president wanted us to be afraid. He wanted us to be afraid of putting forward our own vision on immigration. He thinks that he's going to scare a whole bunch of people in this country to supporting him by turning those brown folks into the enemy. And I said, I'm not going to let him do that. I'm not going to back off from that issue. I'm going to put forward my own proposal, something that is positive, something that is reasonable and common sense. And my hope is that no matter what happens in this race, although I believe that I'm going to win, with your help, that no matter what happens in this race, I hope that there are a whole bunch of little Latina girls and Latino boys out there that when I'm on that debate stage or hopefully on that stage in November of 2020 and then on the big stage in January of 2021 that they can look and see that it's not true what this president has said, that we can be anything and we can do anything and we can achieve our dreams and we're as good as anybody else. That's the significance.
Thank you.
Y vamos a ganar. Gracias.
Thank you, Julián. Great way to end it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, so good. Leave the mic here. That's